Welcome back to the Raven LeBeau podcast, where we talk about my narcissistic ex and being in a narcissistic relationship for the past 7 years. This is episode 3, and we are going to talk about how when I got back from vacation and back to my regular life. So grab yourself your favorite drink, your favorite snack, sit back and enjoy the podcast. So I arrived home after a 6-hour flight, and once I got home, I went back to my regular life, everyday kind of thing. So I picked up my car from work, drove home, and then I settled in, spoke to my roommates a little bit about, the trip and how I felt, which was this. I felt like we were starting something good, okay? I felt like we had a connection, but at the same time, there were some things that I did not like. He was always on his phone while I was there, texting whoever, talking to whoever, when he should have been with me, present in the moment, connecting with me, but he would always be on his phone. And I didn't want to say anything or, bring it up, but, it was very disrespectful and rude. And I talked to my roommates about that, and they agreed that he should have been more present and into the moment with us instead of on his phone. And I would later come to find out that he was on his phone talking to hookups that, he was hooking up with during that year that we had agreed we would, do our own thing before we got together. But you would think that when you go to visit someone, that they would cut off the contact for a while, while you're there and just be with you. And like I said in the previous episode, he was working, during my stay there. So he would go to work, and that could have been a good time for him to talk to his booty calls, But no, he did it when he was around me, which, I didn't like, and my roommates didn't like that either. So that should have been another red flag right there. But of course, knowing me, as you do, I ignored it. So I went back to my everyday life, and I started hooking up with people, having fun, and talking to him as, I always did. And we talked, and we exchanged pictures, we video chatted, half naked, fully naked, At this point, we'd already had sex so many times, it was like, why not just, have phone sex during the time that we're apart, too? And I didn't have a problem with that, because we'd already connected somewhat, not the greatest connection, but, it was a connection. So I continued to talk to him. I continued to hook up with other people. I actually went on a actual date with someone. And he was nice, he was cool, but he wasn't quite over his ex either. So we dated for maybe a month or so. He taught me how to play basketball, which I thought was really cute. I never could get it in the hoop. Okay, white girl can't play basketball. Go figure, right? But anyway, I could play basketball, but I was not good. I barely got 3 points in a whole game, so but it was fun. I had a great time with him. We got to know each other, he would stay over, I would cook him breakfast, and stuff like that. But he was not over his ex. So he wound up going back to his ex. And, during this time, I was still talking to my narcissistic ex. And, we were talking. I wasn't telling him about my hookups. He wasn't telling me about his hookups. We did not do that. So after this guy, I kind of just didn't want to hook up with people because I kind of felt like, okay, I'm tired of hooking up. I want someone that I can, go out with on dates, and just have fun with, do things with. But unfortunately, most of what I got were hookups, and I was kind of over that. So I just talked to the narcissistic ex for a while, and, my roommates were not very happy with that. So they wanted to set me up on a date with someone they knew, who they thought I would, get along with, that I would have a great time with. So this is about I'd say 2 to 3 months after, I got back from seeing him, and we'd been talking during that time. And so I said, okay, why not? I was kind of getting lonely, and I kind of wanted the connection with someone, besides the narcissistic ex, which was millions of miles away. So I went on the date, and he came and picked me up, and we went to a nice Brazilian restaurant, which I had never had Brazilian food, so that was a first for me, okay? It was really fancy, and I don't think I dressed properly for that restaurant, but nobody told me how I was supposed to dress. So I had on a nice little outfit, a nice little top skirt with some heels. Um, and that's how I dressed, but I think I was supposed to dress a little more elegant for that restaurant. But I stood out just a little, just a little. And so we went, and I had no idea what to order. So I let him order for me, which he seemed to like to do. So he ordered our dinner, and we had a great conversation. We talked about things that we wanted out of life. We talked about how we wanted to have a relationship with someone who got us, and who understood who we were. And he knew that I was transgender, which was not a problem for him. He had never dated a transgender girl before, which I was a first for a lot of people. Let's just put it that way. I was a first for a lot of people that I went out with. So it didn't bother me. So we continued to date for a couple of weeks. He would take me out to restaurants. He would take me to arcades, which he knew I loved going to, or he would take me to movies. So we did that for a couple of weeks. And then, we decided that we wanted to get more intimate, more in a relationship. And I sort of stopped talking to my narcissistic ex for a while. And he didn't bother to text me, which, go figure, he never would. He didn't bother to text me. So it was about a month into dating this new guy that, he texted me again. He was like, oh, I've been really busy. And I just played along. I really didn't care because I was with a guy that I was really starting to like. And, he took me to his house, which was out near the coast, and I was really nervous about going out there because it was like, there's no one around, kind of vibe thing, like, the calls coming from the house kind of feel. But I went to his house, and we had kind of like a weekend sleepover. And that's when I really got to know him and the things that he was into, which were very kinky, very role play kind of games. And I had never done some of the things that he was into. And so I went along with it, and I learned some things from him, which were not really bad at all. I kind of enjoyed them. He was very much into being a dominant, and he wanted a submissive, which I was submissive, to a point, but he trained me more on how to be completely submissive, which I had no issue with. So we used things like whips, handcuffs. We used ties, so you could tie the person down, blindfolds, so that, you couldn't see what tactile stimulation the dominant was doing. And there were points where I would be nervous, but I would never say the actual code word to stop. So I, went along, and I enjoyed myself with him and everything. And the sex was very erotic, very stimulating, and I was really enjoying myself. So I hadn't talked to my narcissistic ex in a little over, I'd say a couple of weeks went by, and then I texted him just to say hello and to see how he was doing. And of course, he was busy working again. I'm busy, I'm working, and I'm getting things set up for when you come. And I was like, okay, I have no issue with that. You're busy, I'll talk to you later. Because I was busy with my own life. I was busy, making a life with this new guy that I thought was really going to go somewhere. So we get to a point in the relationship where he wanted to take me to this sex club, basically a sex dungeon, if you will. And I had never been to one of those. And I was like, okay, I'll go. And we went. And, I had on an outfit, very revealing. I had a collar with a leash where he would pull me around, and I had no problems with it. I found it very stimulating, very, erotic, and I liked it. And so I'm getting pulled around, and so we're at the sex dungeon, and I'm being led around on this collar and leash. And like I said, it was very erotic. It was very stimulating for me. I liked it. I liked being submissive to him. Then he didn't bother to discuss with me or ask me because he's dominant. So he, in layman terms, or, terms that we all understand, pimped me out to other men that wanted to sleep with me. Which at first I found very uncomfortable. I was not comfortable with it at all, but then it became erotic and sensual, and I really did start to like it. And so I was like, okay, so it's more like a open relationship, or kind of like, I own you kind of thing, and I lend you out, So things are going, things are getting heated and hot, and one of the guys that he lent me out to decided he wanted to punch me in the face. Okay, that's when, for the first time, I used the stop word. And I'd had enough, and I wanted to leave. And so I told him, I said, look, I want to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not down for being hit in the face, I'm not down for that kind of thing. And he didn't say anything to the guy. He didn't protect me or anything like that. We just left. And it was playing in the back of my head all this time, that we're driving back to his house. And I really, really did not feel comfortable with him at this point. And I wanted to just go home. So we get back to his house, and, I change my outfit. I get into my regular clothes, and I ask him if he can just take me home. And he was like, oh, I thought we were going to just, spend the weekend together. I was like, I'd really like to just go home. And at this point, I guess something clicked in his head that I was very uncomfortable. And that's when he talked to me. He was like, as soon as you said the stop word, I got you out of there, and I'm sorry that happened. It just, things like that happen sometimes at these things, and I didn't know what to do because I've never been to one of those things before. And if that's what happens, then that's what happens. But I don't think that that's what's supposed to happen at those things. It's supposed to be consensual. It is supposed to be, discussed, or, somewhat consensual. So I wasn't buying into it, and I wanted to go home. And so he took me home. And while we were in the car ride back to my apartment, he was apologizing, and he was saying that it would never happen again. And my mind was saying, I don't want to see him again. If this is how he likes to play with his, submissive, I don't think I'm on board with that. And I really wasn't on board with that because I didn't really like being pimped out. Yes, it got sensual and it was fun, but at a certain point, I didn't like it, and I became uncomfortable. So I got home, he dropped me off, and he texted me like 10 minutes, like I guess he was on, his way home. 10 minutes had passed. He texted me, that he was going to come get me next weekend for us to go away, on a little trip upstate. And I was like, I really didn't want to go, so I just didn't text him back. I just ignored the text. And so I told my roommates about it, and they were shocked because they didn't even know that the guy was into that kind of stuff. I mean, who's going to know that, that guy's into that kind of stuff if he doesn't advertise it? Which is fine, because I didn't mind it. The part that I minded was getting hit in the face and him not stopping it, me having to stop it as the submissive, that I didn't like. So my roommates were very apologetic and, were trying to console me and stuff, and I was very upset. And I was just like, I don't know who to talk to. So, of course, I hit my narcissistic ex up and I didn't say what had happened to me. I just said, can we talk? It's been a while. And so we talked for a little bit and, he was telling me how, he was working all the time. And the conversation was all about him instead of me. And I was having a bad time. But I let it continue as he talked about himself, about hanging out with his friends, what he was doing. He didn't bother to even ask me how I was doing or what I was doing. I simply had to say, well, my day was, and before I could even talk about, how my time had been going. And at that point, I was just like, really didn't care to talk about it. So I just talked about a few little things that had been bothering me and, a few little things that I've been doing. And then I just let him continue to talk about himself. And then I just, I stopped texting. I said, I'm going to go to bed. You have a good night and blah, blah, blah. And so I went to bed and I'm thinking back on everything. And I'm thinking, how could I have handled things differently with this new guy? And I wasn't sure that there was anything that I could do differently, and I couldn't sleep. And I wasn't afraid or scared or anything like that. It was just, I didn't know what to do at this point. I liked the guy, but I didn't like some of the stuff that happened with him. I liked how he treated me. He was very much a gentleman, very romantic, and then we had our kinky side, which was very stimulating for me. And it, opened me up to a lot of new and different things during sex. So I was very happy about that, but I didn't know if I could trust him, if you know what I mean, with how things went. So he continued to text me. I continued to ignore him for about 3 or 4 days, and it was getting close to the weekend where he wanted to take me away. And I told my roommates he wants to take me upstate, to this bed and breakfast place and, just, have like a do-over, I guess. And they were like, well, if you want to go, but just text us your location and all this so that we know and let us know that you're safe and everything. So I'm thinking, to myself, do I really want to go? And part of me did, and part of me didn't. So the part of me that did want to go, I immediately, my brain was like, yeah, go, you're going to have fun. You like him, he likes you. And then the other part of my brain was like, no, don't do this because something goes wrong, you can't get home, But of course, I didn't listen to that part. I texted him back, that I had been busy, and that I wasn't ignoring him, which technically I was. But I texted him back and we talked and he was like, nothing bad is going to happen. I promise, it's going to be a nice romantic weekend and we're going to have fun. And I was like, okay. So he came and picked me up on Friday night. And it wasn't quite Friday night. It was kind of like late afternoon because we still had to drive like about 2.5 hours to get to the bed and breakfast. So we get to, in the car, get to driving, and going where we're going. We're talking, we're listening to music, we're singing songs together. And I'm like, okay, we know the same songs, we like the same music. And I'm like, maybe that was just a misjudgment and error, and I was like, okay, I'm going to have fun this weekend. So we drive up, we get to the bed and breakfast, and it's a cute little bed and breakfast. I've never been to one, but it's very cute. You go inside, it's very homey inside, very relaxing, very comforting. So he gets the keys, we go upstairs to our room. It's like a little country looking room, with a 4-post bed and a nice little fireplace. And then you have your little bathroom off to the side. And in there was a big tub that, 2 people could sit in and soak. And I was like, okay, this is really cute. This is nice, So we settle in and he's like, well, we should go get something to eat for dinner and then come back and just relax. So we went into this small little town, because the bed and breakfast was a little bit out of town, like in the wooded area. So we went into this small little village kind of town and we got something to eat. It was at a little diner, but it was very cute, So we got something to eat and we were talking. And the night that we went to the sex dungeon came up and well, actually, it didn't come up. He brought it up. And he was saying that he was sorry, and that he didn't know that it was going to go that far. And I told him, I said, can we talk about this when we get back to the room? Because I don't think this is a conversation I want to have in public. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. It was like he didn't care what we talked about in public. And at that point in my transitioning and a part of who I was not very comfortable about talking about certain things in public, like sex or transitioning. I wasn't comfortable in public a lot of times. I wore a lot of makeup to hide my shadow that I would have, So I wasn't comfortable talking about certain things in public. So we finished our dinner. We get back to the room. He turns on some music and we sit down and we talk. And I told him how I felt about it and that I was scared and I didn't realize that that's what happens at those places. And he's like, normally that is not what happens. I was like, well, I don't know. I've never done this before. This is my first time. And he was like, well, from now on, he's like, I will only lend you out to people you want to be lent out to. And I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. And he was like, and I will make sure that there is no hitting or physical contact that is not besides, stimulating or a little whipping, kind of stimulating, no punching, no hitting. And I was like, okay, so he understands where I'm coming from. And I was like, okay, maybe I can really be into this guy. But I was into this guy. Not maybe, I was into this guy. I liked him. He stimulated me both physically, mentally, and sexual arousal was beyond belief with him. But there was something always in the back of my head saying that this is not what I really want, and something back there saying, well, you're not going to be here. You're moving to be with someone else, don't get attached. And then the other part is like, well, you don't really know the other person that well. You're getting to know this person. And I'm just like torn of moving or staying to be with this one or to be with a narcissistic ex. And I told him about the person that I was talking to. And this was about 3 months in to our relationship. And I told him, I said, look, I've been, talking to someone for almost a year now, that lives further out, far away. And we have a connection, kind of, I kind of like him. I was like, but I'm really starting to fall for you. And I'm not sure what I should do at this point. And so he was like, well, if you want to be with this other person, you can be with that person. He was like, but I really like you. You like me, so I don't understand why we can't do our thing. And he had a point. He had a valid point. So at that point, I kind of cut off communication with the narcissistic ex. I didn't ghost him, but when he would talk to me or text me, I would make my text very short. I wouldn't be very lovey-dovey on the text, and I would just say, how's your day? And I would listen to him go on and on about his day, and I wouldn't say anything about my day because he never asked. And the other guy that I was dating where I was living, he would text me, he would ask me, the first thing he would do was ask me how my day was, which was amazing. Like, really, you asked me how my day was. The narcissistic ex never asked me how my day was. So I was leaning more to not moving at this point. I was leaning into staying with him. Well, we continued to date. He was a gentleman. He was everything I ever wanted in a partner. So we went to another sex dungeon, and this was about 5 months in. So we did the sex dungeon again. And we didn't do anything too extreme that night. That night, we just kind of, met up with other couples. I got whipped a little bit. I got, tied up. It wasn't too bad. It was nice. And then there was a guy who I found very attractive, and he wanted me. He wanted to play with me. And my master was like, do you want to play with him? And I was like, yeah, I do. So we went into a private room where there was a bed that had cuffs on it, and there was a X for cuffing standing up. There was a horse for you to lay across. It was all set up for S&M and any other kind of kink you wanted. So we go in there, and my master, lets me off my leash. And I go and I start playing with him. My master is in the room watching the whole thing. And this guy gets really rough. He didn't hit me. He got really rough with the sex. Like, sex that made me bleed, number one. And he bit me several times, very hard, drawing blood. And I was not having fun at this point. It started off great, but at this point, it was, halfway through, and I was not having fun. And I was starting to really hurt, and I was starting to burn, and I just wanted it to end. So I said the word again, and my master, who was really turned on, came over and stopped it, and we left. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. I was like, I don't want to go to these dungeons anymore. I don't want to be lent out to people. I just want to be yours. And he was very not understanding about that, because he liked going to these dungeons. It was part of his lifestyle. And he wants a partner that is willing to be lent out at these places. And I was kind of like, I don't want to do it. I really don't. And so I put my foot down for the first time in a long time. I put my foot down. And I told him, I said, I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. If that's the end of us, that's the end of us. I'm not doing it. I mean, look at me. I am bleeding from several places. I can barely sit down because I am bleeding from back there. I'm like, I am hurting. And you don't seem to understand. And that was the beginning of the end for us. So I told him, I said, I think we're done. I think we've ran our course. I think we are done. And he was like, no, we're not done. We're not done until I say we're done. And I was like, excuse me? I was like, I have a say in this. And then he was like, no, you're mine, and I own you. And I was like, you don't own me. No one owns me. I'm a person. And at that point, I'm in his car, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable. Like, what the hell am I going to do? I can't get out. What am I going to do? So I had to draw it back in, play along until he dropped me home. Once he dropped me home, I texted him. As soon as he pulled away, I got into my apartment. I texted him. I was like, we are done. Please do not contact me again. Well, that was not a good thing, because my phone kept blowing up. My texts were like a mile a minute. And it was like this guy was insane. It was like the text messages went from sweet to evil to menacing to just downright crazy. And I didn't know what to do at this point. He would call me. I wouldn't pick up the phone. He would continue to text me. I would not text him back. And I did not feel safe at all. Okay, let's just put it that way. So I worked the overnights, as we all know. And I would go to my job and, do my job. And then I would come home and sleep during the day. All day long, he's blowing up my phone. All day long. And the narcissistic ex would text me here and there. It wasn't consistent, at this point. He was over there doing his thing, I was doing my thing, and we were just chatting occasionally. So I went to work one night, and he's waiting for me outside of my job, which I was very uneasy. I was trying to get into the job, but my badge wasn't working at the door to get in for some reason. I don't know. But he got me before I could get into work. And to say the least, I was scared out of my mind. That is the least of it. I was terrified. I was petrified. And he's like, I just want to talk to you. I was like, I didn't know what to say. I just froze. And I just sat there like, if I say something that upsets him, what's he going to do? So I didn't say anything. I just sat there and I listened to him. And he's like, I'm sorry, that I come off a certain way. And I'm thinking in my head, a certain way? I'm thinking, you come off crazy as fuck. but I didn't want to aggravate him or say something that would piss him off beyond belief. So I just sat there and I listened. And when he was done and apologized yet again, I simply looked at him and I said, "You're not the person for me, and I'm not the person for you." I was like, "I know you want to own somebody and you want them to be yours. That's not who I am. I'm sorry." I'm like, "I cannot do this with you." And I was like continuing to look at him, and I could see that the expression on his face was starting to change. So while I didn't say anything and he started the conversation again, I reached behind and swiped again on the door, and I heard it click. So I ran inside and left him outside of my job. Went inside, started all my prep for my night shift and everything, and he eventually left. I think he stayed out there for about 10 minutes and then he eventually left. And while I'm working, I get several text messages from him talking about how I'm just a tease and how I am just, someone who should never be in a relationship, because I don't know what I'm doing in a relationship. And at that point, I was just like, I'm done. I blocked him, got rid of his number, and was moving on. So I got done with work. I got a text message early in the morning, right before I'm getting off, and it's from the narcissistic ex. And this was the first time in a long time he asked me, "How was your night?" And a smile came to my face. I don't know why, but it did. And I told him how my night went. And I didn't tell him about the guy because that's not what we did. So I told him my night was okay, and that I did my job and, everything was good. And then he began talking about himself. And then he said, "I'm going to call you on the phone since I'm driving." I was like, "I'm about to drive home too." So, we talked on the phone while I was driving. And he was like, "I've missed you. We haven't really talked, and, I've missed you. And, I can't wait for you to get here, I want you to be here, for the holidays. So I want you to move earlier than expected." And I was like, "Well, I haven't got anything set up for an early move." I was like, "I got it set up for when we originally planned to move." And he's like, "No, I want you here for the holidays because I want to spend the holidays with you." And I was like, "Okay." And I'm just coming off of this fiasco. So I'm feeling a little nervous, a little raw, a little hurt. And him talking to me was making me feel better, making me feel like, okay, he cares, and right now I need somebody who cares. So, I continued to talk to him. And then I got home and I hung up with him because I told him I'm going to get ready to go to sleep, and all this. And one of my roommates was home. So I told that person about what happened. And my roommate was like, "Oh my God." So I was like, "I don't know what to do. He's not going to leave me alone." And so my roommate was like, "I'll take care of it. Don't worry. I know him very well. I'll take care of it. He's not going to bother you again." So I was like, "Okay." So at this point, I continued to talk to the narcissistic ex, more and more. And we, began like a courtship, I guess, over the phone. He's like, "Oh, I'm done with all the hookups. I just want to talk to you." And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, "Really? I don't think so, but okay." I didn't quite believe him at this point that he only wanted to be with me. And granted, I only had about 3 months before November to get everything done, which I was supposed to move closer to my birthday, which would be like the spring, summertime. But he wanted me there for the holidays. Why? I don't know. He wanted me there for the holidays. So I asked him point blank, "Why do you want to rush me out there for the holidays?" And he's like, "Because I miss you and I want you and I don't want anybody else. I've already stopped with all the hookups and I just want to spend the holidays with you. I want to be with somebody for the holidays." And I was like, this sounds really sweet. It sounds really good, and it feels like he's telling me what I want to hear. And I'm not sure exactly if it was him telling me what he thought I wanted to hear or if he actually meant it. Because as I'll speak in the next episode on our trip there and everything, you're going to understand a little bit more of why I didn't quite feel that he meant it. So I'm just going to close out this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you like, subscribe, comment, and share. And I can't wait for you to see the next episode. Have a good day. Bye.